China is the one to watch. The challenge in negotiating with China is that they typically come forward with one ask, maybe two. For the last 30 years, their big issue has been export controls. And it appears that the Trump administration is willing to engage in export controls. This started out after Tiananmen Square, or took a level of change after Tiananmen Square, military gear, and now it's all about technology. So that's important, and that's why the talks are off to a pretty good start, because they're willing to address these tough issues. The other issue that China has always had is a market economy. They wanted to be recognized by the U.S. as a market economy. Today, that's no longer an issue. China is very upfront and clear that they are not a market economy. They are a state-led economy. And now the challenge isn't to try to convince China to make certain modifications so that they become a market economy. It's how do two different systems coexist? That is really the big challenge. One of the things that President Trump has done is opened up the sphere of potential issues on China. So, the cross-border issue with Vietnam, that's something that China wants. So now they have another ask. So, it's a way of raising issues so that China is not stuck on one issue, which is what makes it so difficult to negotiate with them. So that's one to watch. It's not going to happen overnight. Maybe they'll negotiate some mini agreements, but the China deal is long term. I wouldn't expect that to be ready or to be finished by August 1, nowhere near.
We heard President Trump issue a threat to the BRICS groups of countries. Okay, so now Brazil has been singled out with 50%. Of course, China is in BRICS as well. Now, the threat was that if any of the countries were to have any anti-American policies, that they would be slapped with an additional 10% tariff. Now, how is this any different, or is it a little bit of a contradiction when the United States can go and maybe, for a lack of a better word, gang up on China, maybe in other trade deals, namely when it's talking with the UK or any other country? How can the United States justify doing that, but then threatening China, Brazil? You guys, the BRICS, can't do that, and we're going to be, of course, tariffing you more if you go against the United States.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that was a very bold announcement, because, as you say, China is part of it. So we're in the middle of negotiations with China, and the BRICS are all about reducing reliance on the U.S. dollar, reducing the geopolitical reliance on the U.S. So it's hard for the BRICS to be the BRICS without having some, goals of independence from the U.S. So that brings in China. It's another issue that perhaps China will raise. But I think that's a very tricky one. And, there's India's there, but we're negotiating also with India. So I don't see that being resolved by August 1, because, BRICS have a mission, and their mission is to gain more independence from the U.S., and especially the dollar. So that's one to watch. But it's a bold announcement. I was surprised to hear that, because it's hard to imagine how the president finds a way to win. He'll try to find it, and he probably will, but it's a tough one.
What about transshipments with Vietnam? How closely are you watching that? And, of course, what can other countries learn from the deal that has been struck with Vietnam in terms of being a transshipment hub for Chinese goods?
Yeah, that's a way of holding back China. It's another way of really imposing something on China. Yes, it's on Vietnam, but really it's about China. So will that come up in the negotiations? And it's interesting, because what President Trump is doing is raising new issues that China will want to take off the table. And this happened last time with the negotiations. It's sort of like, take out what you just put in, and then we can start negotiating. So the tactic of increasing the number of issues for China may be difficult, because the Chinese know that very well. It's a tactic they use. But that's another one that has come forward that I believe will become part of the U.S.-China negotiations, because it's clearly designed to hurt Chinese exports. But it's another important issue to watch. In the case of China, I think it's a very even negotiation. The U.S. and China, they both want very big things. In other areas, the European Union, the U.S. tends to have the upper hand. The European Union is negotiating to take out things that were put in place 3 months ago. But the U.S. has a long list of very important asks. It's the same thing with Japan and Korea. The 25% auto tariffs on Japan and Korea, on all countries, will be a big issue in the negotiations. So, in that regard, President Trump is on the offensive, and many countries are on the defensive because they're trying to get rid of what was just put in place.
I want to ask about the sectoral tariffs and on copper, this latest confirmation that it will go into effect on August the 1st. What is the strategic significance of these copper tariffs, and will it have any impact, a significant impact or material impact compared with country tariffs?
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to this. Sectoral tariffs could be a little bit longer term, right? So steel, aluminum, maybe copper are perhaps more strategic. Autos and auto parts, the president said he wants to bring back more manufacturing. However, they will also be used in country negotiations. So, there's a threat that pharmaceuticals will go to 200% tariffs. That hasn't been decided, but it's a threat. That could very easily be part of the EU negotiations. It could be a threat. Autos and auto parts could be a threat for Korea and Japan. The thing about copper that makes it interesting is, it's deemed a national security issue. Importing so much copper, almost 50%, puts the U.S. at risk. It's a vulnerability. But we don't have capacity right now to offset imports. Perhaps capacity will be online in 27 and 28, assuming that there's a guarantee that those tariffs will stay in place. Because if companies are going to put up capital investment, they've got to know that the status quo will remain. So it's a very tricky one, because in the meantime, what we're going to see is some shortages and price increases. So I hope that one is included in country tariffs, although the only countries that can really care about this are Canada. But the big part of U.S. imports of copper are from Chile, and Chile isn't part of the game right now. So it's a very interesting one. It's another bold decision that I hope there's an end game for it, because again, capacity is going to take a couple of years to come online.